Yeah, so I think budgeting is one of the most important things to start with. I think fundamentals are really the key to success. And with a lot of young professionals, what I hear often is, okay, well, I don't really need to budget yet. Like, my life's too simple. Once I have a family or kids is when I'll start. But what we see is that if people don't start young and get in those habits, they're not going to be able to do it later when things are more complex.
All right, we're back with another episode breaking down the long game. It's been a couple weeks. I went to Michigan, you went to California. We did some self-quarantine to make sure we're all good. So we're back to discuss another one of Thomas's blog posts from a couple weeks ago, really geared towards young professionals and getting a good start. So just to set the stage, we're going to be doing more of these infographics that you'll see in the blog post. The link is in the notes. Kind of walking you through some foundational things. Now, these aren't going to cover everything that could potentially go in there, but the big hitters, if you do these, this will get you into a good start to your foundation for financial planning and your finances. So the next up will be young families, mid-career, before retirement. We'll hit them all. So everybody will be addressed through these. So let's hit the young professional one first, and we're going to start with budgeting. So what about budgeting?
Yeah, so I think budgeting is one of the most important things to start with. I think fundamentals are really the key to success. And with a lot of young professionals, what I hear often is, okay, well, I don't really need to budget yet. Like, my life's too simple. Once I have a family or kids is when I'll start. But what we see is that if people don't start young and get in those habits, they're not going to be able to do it later when things are more complex. So that's why I would start with budgeting. But I really believe in the simple budgeting approach, which we have another blog post about, and we'll talk a little bit more later. But the way to do this is you basically just figure out your take-home pay. You subtract out your fixed expenses and savings and Roth IRAs and those things that you want to do, and then the money that you're left with allows you to go do the things that you want to do. So you don't really have to nickel and dime and keep track of like going out and those type of things. You just know, here's how much money I have left, here's what I can use to go do the things that I want. And the best thing about that is you shouldn't feel any guilt doing it that way.
And that'll work for some people, and for others it won't. Some people need to watch every penny. There's a lot of factors that go into figuring out your budget. Part of it's going to be your self-discipline, whether or not you can operate under that mindset of, okay, I have this bucket of money that I can spend however I want. I've got everything else, all of my rent or my mortgage and my savings all accounted for over here, and here's my spending. Or if I don't give myself a budget for going out to eat and shopping, I'm going to go over and cause problems. So budgeting itself is a simple concept, but it's also very personalized, and there's a lot of moving pieces to it. There's software to help you out, like you need a budget. Whatever works for you is what you need to do. There's not one right way to budget, but you might want to try around with a couple of different ways of doing it to see what resonates and what's going to be the best case for you. So what we do in our household, we actually have two checkings. We have a checking account that money goes in to cover all our bills. That is designed to hit zero at the end of the month because I know exactly what our bills are. And we have another checking account that's our gas, grocery spending that we can do whatever we want. And as long as we don't exceed that, we're free to do whatever we want. And then we plan for other things along the way. There's a piece, and I think it's in the other budget post that you have that I really like, where you mentioned that a lot of people think budget is a negative word. Where it should be looked at as a positive word. And I really like that. And I forget who else I've heard say that before. I feel like it's something Carl Richards would say, but that a budget is actually a freeing exercise. It shows you where you get to spend your money, where you get to allocate your dollars. And we really like talking about allocating your finances to things that align with your values and your purpose. So if you think about it, okay, here's this money I get to go apply towards the things that are most important to me. That's exciting rather than, oh, I only get to spend X amount of dollars on this. So I really like that you brought that up, and like I said, I think that's in the other one, so it's a good tease.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing with budgeting as well is in the first couple months you're going to start to realize and become aware of how you spend your money. Most people don't necessarily realize, like, wow, so much of my money is going to this thing. Does that actually create happiness for me? And if it doesn't, then maybe you figure out, how do I cut spending there and move it to the things that actually do create happiness for you?
And a lot of people don't want to go through that exercise because we just want to deny what we spend money on. But it's look at your, if you run it all through a credit card and pay it off every month, or you use your debit card, look at your transactions. You'll be surprised how many little things you're spending money on that really don't bring a lot of value to your life, that if you're crunched, you can maybe cut out and apply towards other things. Emergency fund, let's hit that.
Yeah, so I think emergency fund is extremely key. There's always the general rule of thumb of 3 to 6 months of expenses to have an emergency fund. Obviously, rules of thumb are great, but it depends on the person. But what I think is extremely important about it is it just gives you a cushion. It gives you something to feel confident in if something happens like COVID, or you lose a job, or you need to fix something at your house. You have this cushion that can help you where you don't have to turn to credit card debt or something else that really sets you back financially.
And the emergency fund is low on the steps. Walking up the steps, it's early on, because it is something that you should strive to get addressed early on, because then it gives you the flexibility to go do other things. I don't think you should be investing very much if you don't have an emergency fund. Maybe you're getting your 401k match because of the free money, and we're going to hit that here in a second, but your emergency fund should become a priority, because if you have one of those emergencies, you don't want to be forced to selling investments. There could be penalties and taxes. It could be a bad time in the market. You want to have this cushion of money that is earning nothing and frustrating you because it's sitting in cash, but it's there. I think the rule of thumb of 3 to 6 coming out of COVID is going to change. We talked about this new normal of working from home. I think a new normal when it comes to finance is the 3 to 6 month goal might be stretched out to 6 to 9 or 6 to 12 months of expenses, because we're seeing that things can shut down for reasons we never thought would happen, and you could be out of work or have reduced income for a long period of time. Another thing, again, everything with personal finance is personal. When it comes to how much you might need personally, there's a lot of factors that go in. You look at your expenses, and that's kind of where you figure out the month side of things. But what's your job? Are you in sales? If you're in sales and you rely on something that's selling that's very sensitive to the economy, you might want to have a bigger emergency fund, because you may feel the impact sooner than anybody else. So depending on what you're in, that may also steer how conservative you can be. And the final piece is your personal comfort with risk. If you are comfortable not having the extra cash, then maybe you can skirt by on the lower end. But I would argue if you're aggressive, you might be taking risks in your career, then maybe you want to err on the higher side of having more cash on hand to offset some of the risks you're taking elsewhere. So it's very personal. Don't use 3 to 6 as the end all be all, but use that as a starting point, a goal to get started, and then looking at your budget, looking at your goals, looking at your comfort level, kind of formulate what's that ideal amount of savings for you. There is a point, though, where too much cash is inefficient. One more final thing. Your cash for your emergency fund, try to find the highest interest-bearing account that you can. Your big banks are paying you nothing. You can move to an online bank and get, I use Ally, so I know it's over 1%. I also bank with Chase, and we're getting like 0.1 there. So if you have money that's sitting there, you just need it to be safe and secure. Don't put it in bond funds. We saw those go down 8% earlier this year, short-term bond funds in that little crazy period of time with bonds. So those, even though they're more conservative, aren't safe. You need this emergency fund realistically to just be as safe as possible, and then find the place that you can earn the most interest without tying it up. 401k match, where does this fit into things?
Yeah, I think this is one of the first things that you should do as well. So you start your job, they tell you you have a 6% match. You should at least take the 6% match, because that's 100% return on the dollars that you're putting in. There's very few investments in life that give you a guaranteed return, and this does. So I think it would be silly to not take the advantage that they're giving you there.
Right, and I would agree. You want to get that free money. The caveat being, if you have circumstances in your plan, you have a significant amount of debt or other things that might warrant you delaying that 6 months, then maybe you want to consider that. But experience has shown me that if we delay things, we never get around to doing it. So if you can get that 6% coming out before your first paycheck even gets paid, then you're not used to having that money. And then now you can build your budget based off of what you have coming in. And you've already built in this savings behavior. You've already got the match. And then you can go look to the other steps of where you want to fill in. So you definitely want to get that free money. You also want to understand how long you have to be there to be vested in it. If you have a 3-year vesting schedule, I don't know if that's a real number, but if it, whatever it might be, and you're only going to be there for a year, then maybe you address some other goals or other needs first, because you wouldn't get that match anyway. But definitely get the free money.
And then the other thing is keep the investing simple in your 401k. Target date funds are great. We don't need to be, trying to be too difficult and inside the 401k.
So I did a financial plan for somebody who works on a mutual fund, like fund manager. Would have expected to see it all picked into funds. That's what they do. They pick stocks for their living, and the 401k was 100% target date fund. And that was kind of eye-opening, because before I like to pick funds. Investments is what I fell in love with the profession. I've learned that that's less of the value you provide. But if a target date fund is good for a fund manager, then it's probably okay for you, especially if you're trying to do this on your own or you're getting started, you don't have an advisor. So a target date fund, if you don't know, it has a date next to it, and that's supposedly when you're going to need the funds, retirement. The longer out the date is, the more aggressive it's going to be. The key is all of your money goes into this fund, and then it's diversified, globally diversified. So you don't have to worry about picking all the funds. You know it's going in there. Unless it's a super, super expensive target date fund and you have some index funds as your other options, it's probably going to be a good start for a lot of people. And then as you get more in there and you learn more, maybe you can do some other things, work with an advisor. But if you want to get started, you don't have any help, the target date fund is probably a great place to get started. All right, high interest debt.
Yeah, so I think the start of the list on debt is definitely high interest debt. So if you have any credit card debt or any debt that's up there in the 20%, you should be paying this down as quickly as you can. And typically what I would do is I would put all of the extra dollars you have that you're going to go towards debt to one single debt. So if you have a credit card that's $3,000 at 25%, pay all of those extra dollars towards there till that's gone, and then roll it on to the next debt. It's called the snowball method. Tends to be the most effective in my experience.
And I like the snowball depending on what the setup is. So this is where everything gets personal. Depending on what the setup looks like, let's say you have 3 or 4 cards and they're pretty close in interest rate. One's 22, one's 20, one's 18. So they're close enough. And you have one big one and a couple smaller ones. I tend to like to go after the smaller ones first, even if they're not the highest, if it's close. And here's the reason why. Momentum. Starting a plan, you have a lot of momentum. 6 months in, if you don't see a lot of progress because you're really tackling this bigger debt and it's still there, that can be frustrating and people give up. But if you are 6 months in and one card's paid off and the second one's almost gone, you have some momentum to keep you going. So again, if interest rates are close enough to where it's not a huge detriment, I think you're much better off getting some momentum built in, feeling confident, feeling good about your plan, making progress, even if that means you pay a little bit more interest over the long term, because you run the chance of, if you go after that big one and never really make progress, you may end up paying more interest over your lifetime because you abandon the plan. So I like to build that in just kind of as a behavioral thing, again, unless it's a glaring difference in interest rates. All right, so after we worry about our high interest debt, Roth IRA or increasing the 401k, where's that fit in?
Yeah, so this is just starting to focus a little bit more towards retirement. Roth IRAs are great options for people. You can do $6,000 a year and you use post-tax dollars, so you're never going to be taxed on those dollars again. I think it's a really great tool. I think depending on the person and the situation and your plan, you could either go that route or increase your 401k contributions up to even the maximum, which is $19,500. So both of them are good options. It just really depends on your situation, your income, and what your goals really are.
And when you're trying to figure out the Roth versus the traditional, there's lots of studies out there, lots of blog posts saying which one's best. You're factoring in guessing what taxes are going to be now versus in the future. We don't know. So I'm in the camp of it's not a bad thing to have a little bit of everything. So have some pre-tax money, have some post-tax money, have a taxable account. So that way, as you progress through life, you have all these different options of where you want to take money from given circumstances, age or tax brackets or whatever it might be. So if you know exactly where taxes are going to be in the future, we can tell you what's the best one, but you don't. So the key there is you get your emergency fund funded, start getting the match, tackle the high interest debt, because chances are the interest you're paying would not be offset by the earnings and the investments that we're talking about in this stage. You could be optimistic, but if you're at 20%, to say you're going to consistently earn 20% on the extra money you're investing is a tough thing to do. So you're better off paying off that interest. And then maybe it's splitting or figuring out. Another thing is kind of where your income is and what your options are. There's a lot that goes into it. But the next step would be, once you take care of that high interest, begin to look to do some more long-term or mid-term investing. I'd throw maybe in here investing in a taxable account as well, depending on your goals. Roth IRA or 401k is longer term, but if you are one of the dreamers that we like working with and you want to start a business in 5 or 10 years, or you want to have the opportunity to invest in some private businesses or something, then a taxable account may be a better suit. I think the key here is now we're looking more mid to long-term savings again, because you've checked off all those other boxes.
But this is even if you're saving for a home, that's also a good option. And I think you hit on this pretty well, but we do know taxes today are pretty low. And so if you are a young professional that isn't really making a ton, a Roth option might be great for you because taxes are low and you're in the lowest tax bracket you'll probably be.
And I know someone's going to chime in. If you're a young professional not making very much, how are you going to be able to fund it? If you're doing your budgeting, you might be able to. So I know that that's an option. We're talking about having the privilege of being in a position to be able to do all these things, and a lot of people don't. But these are questions we're seeing. These are things that we're seeing young professionals trying to work through. So that's why we're talking about it.
Yep.
Unfortunately, everybody doesn't get to have these problems, and we're aware of that. But these are some of the answers to those questions. And finally, once we get that taken care of, low interest debt.
Yeah, so this one falls to the bottom of the list. So this is something, maybe a mortgage or car loan or something where 3 to 5% interest, which is really low. So it wouldn't be super efficient to be putting tons of extra dollars to pay this down quickly. But if you are sitting with extra money, getting rid of debt is kind of a liberating thing. So if you don't have midterm goals or other things that you need to save for, then a great option is to go towards this low interest debt.
And this is where it comes back to the personal again. Me personally, I have no interest of paying off my mortgage ahead of time. Yes, it would be nice to own my house outright, but I would much rather have those extra dollars accessible to me or in an investment that I think will do better than 3% over the long run. So me personally, I value liquidity and higher earnings than paying off my mortgage. But there are people out there, very smart people, that understand all these numbers but still have a lot of value that they place in not having that debt and having the mortgage gone. And I think that we're both in the camp of when we look at a plan, we can look at the spreadsheet answer, which would say low interest debt should fall lower. Let's not pay off the mortgage, let's invest elsewhere. That's the finance side, that's the spreadsheet side. But the personal side may be my values speak that I want to be debt free for this reason. I saw my parents lose their house because of whatever it might be. I want to never be in that position. I want to own my house outright. And if that trumps the extra earnings you can make on the interest, then I think that's the direction you go, because this is your plan as the client. Our job is to help you make wise decisions and look at all of the data that's out there and all of the scenarios, and then you put the personal in your personal plan of deciding what you think is best. So I do agree that the low interest should be a lower priority, unless you just value that so much. And I know a lot of people think that once I pay off all this debt, then I'll really start making up my savings and investing. And while we have good intentions, it doesn't always play out that way. And we've seen the charts in, JP Morgan's Guide to Retirement of, Sally the saver versus, Donald the delayer, or whatever it might be. It shows you if you save at different ages and delaying, what that does to your long-term growth. So it is better to get started because of compound interest doing more for you. And I understand, well, when I pay off this debt, the payments I'm making could go into savings. But things come up. We're talking to young professionals. So you're single right now, or maybe you're just a couple. You pay this debt off, and then now you have a child. And then now you maybe aren't able to save like you thought you were going to be able to, and it just keeps on getting pushed further down, where if you start a little bit earlier, you could put yourself in a position where later in life, you could maybe pull back on the savings because of the start you got and allocate dollars elsewhere. So as you can see, you look at this chart, it seems obvious, but you're hearing us discuss this, and there's all these other variables that make it so difficult for people to work through and make personal finance so much personal more than it is finance. So I think that the graphic was great. You did a good job on it. I love that we now have that in our repertoire that we can use with our content. So we're bumping up at the end of what this camera is going to be able to hold, and we already had to restart because the other camera ran out of hard drive space. So in the comments, link to Thomas's blog post with the infographic. Go check it out. Share it with some friends and get them started as well. Leave us some comments. What do you think? What's your input? What have you seen be successful for you? What have you seen not be successful for you? Throw those in there. Be sure to subscribe as well. Share with your friends and help get these videos circulating around because we have a lot more coming. So Thomas, thanks for the great blog post, and everybody, we'll see you all in the next episode.